Welcome again to Fantasy Fiction Focus. Today we are interviewing J S Dunn, who I'm speaking with in Florida, where it's hopefully sunny, and she's wearing green. Hello, how are you?
Great, thank you, Simon.
Now, you're wearing green because obviously, as you mentioned earlier, it is St. Patrick's Week, apparently. Yeah, I thought they only had a day, but the Irish, they tend to celebrate a lot. You also have written a book as well, which has very strong connections to Ireland, and I guess that's why we have you on here. So tell us all about this wonderful book of yours.
Bending the Boyne, the title is sort of a pun on the fact that the River Boyne has a large bend just before it goes to the ocean. And in that bend, like a triangle, are three huge passage mounds. In other words, mounds that you can walk inside. And the largest mound, now called Newgrange, is actually a 60-foot long passage that still admits light from the winter solstice sunrise after 5,000 and some years. It and the other two mounds were completed before the pyramids, and unfortunately for you as a Brit, they were also completed well before Stonehenge was even begun. There might have been a wood circle of posts at Stonehenge, but these mounds had already been constructed, and the construction is amazing. They put the inner slabs into place in the passageway, and then they put in a double roof to keep the weight of the mound off the passage. And the inner chamber is built to stand separately from the passage. So all of its orthostats, its uprights, are separate from the passage, and they support the central weight of the mound. And then there's a corbelled inner ceiling. This is all dry stacked stone that rises almost 20 feet, so that when you've actually progressed to the very inside of Newgrange Mound, you look up and you get a feeling as if you are in a cathedral.
Now, and this is obviously this is near Dublin, is it, or further away from that?
As the crow flies, it's around an hour north of Dublin. Given the country lanes, it could take you 2 hours to find it. Just depends.
Okay, and this is how old is this? You mentioned Stonehenge there. So how old is this structure?
They think the three mounds were completed prior to 3000 BC. So if you add the BC component and our 2000 years, that's over 5,000 years old.
Wow. So and your book, of course, is set during this time period, which I believe is the Bronze Age, isn't it? Not the Iron Age. This is the Bronze Age.
My book, I was going to build it concerning the building of the mounds, and I decided to shift the date forward to the point in time when the Bronze Age begins, which they think was around 2500 BC, because that's when evidence of metal smelting arrives in the Isles. And it was actually in Ireland where copper was first smelted. It was down in the southwest of Ireland, but one of the few other places from that period where they have found evidence of smelting was at the Boyne. And this story came to me that whoever was coming in, if they wanted to get control over the whole island, they would go to the power center, which obviously would be the Boyne. So that was the beginning of the story of the native people living at the Boyne and maintaining the mounds and practicing their astronomy, naked eye astronomy, and the people coming in from the coasts of Brittany and Spain who are looking for copper and gold, and the clash, of course, then between the two cultures. And I gave the characters names from the earliest cycle of Irish myth so that people who had read the Irish myth would feel a little more comfortable. They could relate to these characters more because they would have heard those names, and now they can say, oh, aha, okay, maybe Bowen started out this way, or the Dagda, the seer, the all-seeing priest figure. They would have heard that name since childhood.
So lots of research, no doubt, with a book like this. I would think. Did you? You're in Florida, of course, and of Irish heritage. But did you do a lot of traveling to research the book?
At one point, for about 6 years, I had a house in Ireland and used that as a base from which to go to Wales, to bits of the UK, mostly Cornwall, and to northwestern France, Brittany, and all along the northern coast of Spain, which is called the Costa Verde, the Green Coast. Its climate is very much like the Isles. And all those places have megaliths. They all have the beginnings of this mound building culture, and then later what are called by archaeologists the Beaker people came along and overtook that whole area at 2500 BCE. It's astonishing how fast things changed. The mounds were abandoned. They started building fortified settlements. There's evidence for the first time of organized warfare or battle contests. And carvings were put into rocks everywhere from Spain up to Orkney of long copper daggers. I mean, they were carving these daggers into the rock as a warning or some sort of emblem of, we are here, the long knife people are here. Uncanny.
But have you always been interested in this particular time period, or just in Ireland and Irish history in general?
No, you know, growing up Irish American, there are some families who are sort of fanatic about it. Ours was not. And it wasn't until I went to Ireland a couple of times and discovered that I just really enjoyed it there. I like the humor. I love the stories and the crack at the pub. And I'm interested in history and got sidetracked really on the megaliths, because normally I would be going to art museums or ruins, and Ireland basically has had a lot of its art and its patrimony ripped off, so there's not much of that to look at. So you can go look at what they have, and what they have are the vestiges of the Neolithic period and Bronze Age.
So this is obviously, when did this come out? I should ask that. I should know this. Actually, when did this book come out?
Bending the Boyne came out in 2011, and hopefully there will be a second coming out this year called Stealing Terra.
Oh, is this a sequel or just something set in the same period? Is it have the same characters? What about this one?
It's a sequel to the extent that, again, I'm riffing on Irish mythology like it's jazz. I pick up a little bit of the myth and I play around with it as a theme. And it's got some colorful characters like Ingsel the One-Eyed or Connery the Great. No, not Sean Connery, the other one. Connery the Great, who was a young king at Tara, who unfortunately is doomed, and it shows his downfall. So those are the two themes in the book. And Ingsel the Great is from Cornwall, and he, of course, is a smuggler, since Cornwall is so famous for their pirates.
And so this is done. It's already completed.
It's so close to finished. I just need to be locked into a room to get it done.
Okay, so hopefully that will be coming out this year. Then I would imagine hopefully by the end of the year.
2015.
Oh, okay. So, and what after that? After that, it sounds like there's quite a lot to scope here to do more.
Well, I'm working my way through the Bronze Age and finding periods of change to focus in on, and then finding an appropriate myth. For example, for Stealing Terra, I seized on Connery's myth because one little line mentions a gold cup. Well, as it happens, in the time period that I'm interested in, the Middle Bronze Age, that was the status item. There are only about 6 of them found. One of them was found at Rillaton. One was found at Ringlemere. Those are called the Rillaton and Ringlemere cups. And those are now at the British Museum. And these are beaten cups of sheet gold and happen to be apparently what the elite were exchanging. It's like the status item from the Middle Bronze Age. Well, then to see the reference in that particular myth, which I haven't seen in any other, to a gold cup, I just said, aha, this is it, this is the one. So I will do that again if I write about the late Bronze Age. Look for some mention in the myths that the medieval priests screwed up and left in there that tells us something about when these myths may have actually originated.
So it sounds like you're going to stick with this particular time period, or will you maybe consider future works on different eras in Irish history?
Well, for all the nerds out there, once I've finished with the Isles, my next project, I should live so long, is to write about Archimedes and an ancient computer that was found underwater called the Antikythera. You ever heard of it? Yes. They think Archimedes was in some sense the progenitor, although his time period would be a bit before the Antikythera. But if I can come up with some story about the development of that, I'll be happy.
So we've talked about your research, I suppose, into this and the travels that you made. So how important is it to get the research right for something like this, for the ones about the Bronze Age?
Well, it's very scary, and I have to say I actually had archaeologists vetting portions of it, and then at the end of it, when I had a first draft of Bending the Boyne, I had a very kind man from Canterbury Trust, Peter Clark, who's quoted on the back cover, read the entire manuscript, and also William O'Brien, the man who discovered Ireland's first copper mines, vetted a draft. And frankly, I even bugged Barry Cunliffe, Sir Barry Cunliffe, to comment on portions of the manuscript.
So it's very important to get it right. I know we've talked about that with some other people, and the amount of research is incredible, and it has to be right because, especially with adults or books for adults, because they will be scrutinized by experts, of course.
Yes, and then your task is to turn it into something that's also readable, which is very difficult. I started writing this as narrative nonfiction, and a New York editor said, no, write it as historical fiction, so that set me back about 2 years. But the research itself took, are you ready? Over 10 years.
No, that doesn't surprise me at all with something like this. It does take a long time, and there's an awful lot to do. Now, you mentioned astronomy in this too. I think something about naked eye astronomy, which I'm assuming does not mean naked people looking at the stars. This means they obviously didn't have telescopes.
Well, there would have been a few naked people because they're Irish and it's the Bronze Age, but naked eye refers to the fact, yes, that they did not have any lens to use that we know of. But there are other tools. I mean, even your fingers. If you want to find the star Sirius, which is now the most bright star in the sky, for example, if you put your index finger up on the last star in the belt of Orion, and then you go down 2 thumb lengths, you'll be on Sirius. So those are the kind of simple tricks that they could use, that they probably knew quite well, better than I just described it, about finding the stars and finding constellations. There's a little bit of evidence in the Irish language for their names for constellations as evidence that yes, they were in fact looking at the skies. But our best evidence is this astonishing construction of a passage mound with a 60-foot long passage that to this day admits the winter solstice sunrise. And it's up on the riverbank, and the sun has to come up over an incline called Red Mountain, and they have just figured out why it was sited that way. There's usually a mist over the River Boyne on a winter morning because of the temperature difference between the air and the water. By putting the mound where they did on a rise and waiting for the sun to come up above Red Mountain and then come inside the mound, they get up above the mist. So the mist is not a factor. So that's just amazing that they could do that.
And also, I suppose that the stars, it would have been very important to do the navigation at sea, because otherwise they wouldn't have been the contact for trade with places as far away as northern Spain.
Right, and there's there's a great documentary called Blood of the Irish that gets into some of those issues in talking about how, because the archaeogenetics are that most people in Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, and parts of Scotland, genetically speaking, are very similar to the north of Spain, including the Basques. So we know they were coming up here because it's the same genetic pool, and the question is, how did they navigate? And it's probably not the case that they were fraidy cats and hugged the shore the whole way on the whole trip. You know, that's the most direct route is actually to go straight north from Spain, and you hit Ireland.
And of course, the languages have similarities too, don't they?
The proto-languages have great similarities, and a linguist named John Koch, who works with Barry Cunliffe, has now decided that Spain has the earliest evidence of any written Celtic language.
And of course, there's the link to the Irish too, I suppose. Yeah. So yeah, you've explained about the Irish heritage and things, yeah. But what is it? Is the one thing about this particular time period, the Bronze Age, and at this time? What is it about this time that fascinates you so much that you want to write books about it?
Because everything changed when metals were introduced. Fire-making ceramics was one big technological change for them. And then to use fire, think of it, to melt rocks and smelt something that shone like the sun or the moon, depending on which metal you're talking about, was just shattering. And now they had knives, they could make axe heads, they could make awls, they could make needles. You know, I mean, everything just expanded in terms of how they could interact with their environment for good and for bad, frankly. If you think now how integral metals are to our lifestyle, it's really scary. And for them, this would have just been amazing, and also introduced trade on a much heavier scale. The evidence before that is, yes, they visited with other tribes from other lands, but it was to exchange stone axe heads or brides or skins or whatever. There wasn't any consistent trade. But with the metals, you know, there was a lot of trade. There was an introduction of elites. The guys with the long knives were the guys in power, you know.
So it sounds like this was a very influential time then for them. It changed their lives, a bit like the discovery of printing or gunpowder or something like that in later centuries, I guess.
And it happened in the Isles much earlier than in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean doesn't get hopping like this until about 1200 BC. And that's when you see Troy built and Carthage rising and Greek city-states consolidating into sort of a nation concept. And eventually, you know, at 600 BC in the Iron Age, we have Rome. But think about how very early this is. And where is it happening? It's happening in the Isles. It's not happening in the Mediterranean. And what we're seeing now in archaeology is that now that a lot of archaeologists are a little nervous about, you know, working in the Mideast, and they finally start digging at home, they're finding out all sorts of things they didn't know. So I'm kind of out there telling the public, look at all the neat stuff they're digging up, and it's totally changing our whole idea of what Northern Europe was capable of.
So how is it being received so far? Is it selling quite well and getting good reviews?
Yes. I mean, we're 3 or 4 years down the road now from when it came out. It was, of course, St. Patrick's Day in 2011. And the first 2 years were very good. It won a judged national U.S. competition called the Next Generation Awards. And that also makes it scarier to bring the next one out because you're naturally afraid as the author that the next one's going to be barking like a dog, you know, and won't win any awards and no one will buy it and boo-hoo.
But this next one's going to be out hopefully by the end of the year.
Hopefully 3 months or so.
Well, at least it's coming. This year is when it's coming out. Now, I'm assuming, I probably shouldn't assume, but I'm assuming that this wonderful work of yours, the existing one, is available in all these different formats, print, ebook, etc.
Wonderful quality print, beautiful layout, and also an audio format. People have to download the audio. It's I think it works with MP3s, but anyway, it's accessible via audio, print, and of course all the e-reader digital formats. So it's available on Sony and Kindle and.
So there's really no excuse for people not buying this book, then, really.
I really like the audio version for people who like to get their books that way. I can't recommend it highly enough because I and the little publisher entity that I work with insisted that the reader be a native Irish speaker. It's not somebody from Boston trying to fake it. It's not a Canadian trying to fake it. It's an Irish speaker. He has lived in the States for a number of decades, and I told him to put on that Culture accent, a country accent. So,
that's it. I was going to ask you about that actually, because I know that most of the time, I'm sure that a lot of authors, when their books are turned into audiobooks, the voice isn't right for them. It's not how they imagine it, but they didn't want to do it themselves. The author was not interested in doing it themselves, and they get professional, voice actors to do this. So it's actually an Irish accented person, really from Ireland. That's great.
Yeah. As it happened, he grew up close to the mounds, so he was personally interested in the story.
Now, other people may be personally interested, of course, in all the background to the story as well as the book itself, and they may want to find out all about the research you've done, and they won't want to listen to this video all the time to find that out. So where can they find about you? Are you online, websites and things?
There is a website, jsdunnbooks.com, and it has links to an exhaustive repertoire of other websites they can look at, from artifacts in Spain to France to all through the Isles. I mean, any object that I have pictured in the book, I tried to link in the website to a place where a reader could go read more about it. And there's a pretty comprehensive bibliography on the website. So if they want to go spend 8 or 10 years reading, they've got the list, they can do it.
Well, I know that's something I'm always interested in with some of these historical fiction books. I always like to know, where did they find this out? I'm not trying to check up on them. I'm just interested. I mean, I'm going to be looking into this structure on the Bend in the Boyne now. I'm going to be looking into that one we've done here. So that's great. So people can find out as much as they would like, just at the click of a mouse, I guess.
Yes.
Good for you. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add for our viewers here at Fantasy Fiction Focus today?
I hope they really enjoy it. It's a little bit of a cross between Clan of the Cave Bear, where she also early on researched her books heavily, and I'd say Edward Rutherford. He wrote Sarum, which includes early on some information about what was known at that time about the building of Stonehenge. So if they think of it as a sort of a hybrid, that may acclimate them for it.
Well, I'm sure that they'll enjoy it. I'd like to thank you for being on here today. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'm hoping that I'm certainly going to be looking into details about the book, so I'm hoping that will be an exciting experience for me, but also for other people too when they learn more about it. So thank you very much to J S Dunn, and we wish you all the best in the future with the book.
Thank you, Simon.